I had a lovely childhood.
Right.
Unfortunately, we were a lovely family until the war broke out.
And what
Until
happened?
the Germans invaded Poland.
And when the Germans invaded Poland, what happened to your family?
Well, all scattered everywhere. It's a very, very long story.
Please tell me.
Well, first of all, 1939, when the Germans invaded Poland, Krakow, they came in very well prepared with a list of most affluent Jewish families. And amongst them was our family. Several days passed, and a group of Nazis entered our home. They demanded they want to speak to my mother. She spoke fluent German. And they looked around, and they told her, "You've got a very nice home, but you won't be needing it for very long. We command you, by 12 o'clock tomorrow, you have to deliver all the things which we see here. If not, one of your children is going to be shot here and now." My mother said, "Please, whatever you see here, we will deliver as you command." You see, as university schools, everything was closed. One of my brothers, who was studying dentistry, happened to be at home, and they pointed at him. So can you imagine how we felt, and especially my mother? And she says, "We will deliver everything what you see here." And off they went. It was rather difficult, hard to deliver all our belongings, with the exception of furniture, because everything was requisitioned. Cars, lorries, vans, everything was taken away. So my mother was rather very bright, and she thought she would walk out several kilometers outside Krakow to a farmyard. She managed to obtain a horse with a wagon. And to our astonishment, she came back and she was absolutely so surprised. And of course, it was wonderful. We started loading our belongings. Several times we had to go backwards and forwards. It was rather a long distance. And the last one, my mother broke down. Why? Because all those years she worked and she saved for. And now she had to give everything away. But that wasn't sufficient. A few hours later, another group of Nazis entered, and they're looking around if everything was gone. And one of them noticed a tennis racket on top of the wardrobe. And they said, "Ah, you haven't delivered the tennis racket." My mother said, "Look, I apologized. We were so busy packing our silver, our carpets, our paintings, our linen, but we did not look what was on top of the wardrobe. And please forgive me." One of them already taken out the gun from his holder and pointed at my brother. We were all in tears and begging him for forgiveness. Eventually they had a little chat amongst themselves, and they turned round to my brother, "You are lucky today." And off they went. So we were so relieved, at least we stayed alive. And every day we had to assemble outside the headquarters, work with allocated to us, which we weren't accustomed to. It was rather very difficult. We were terrified to go on the street. And then they used to take us down to the trucks to unload coal, huge lumps of black coal, you know, and place them in buckets and carry them quite a long distance, and backwards and forwards. And we were not only just carried them, but we were also whipped. Can you imagine? I was only about 14 years old then. And this work, by the time we got home, we were completely, utterly exhausted. And every single day, all type of work. Then, of course, the rumors they're going to create a concentration, the ghetto, and segregations began. So many men being sent away, and some women, mainly men. Older people were taken to the woods, never see them again. Children, they couldn't go out in the streets like they used to play before. Little babies, when they've seen in a cot, in a pram outside, they've taken them by their feet and thrown them against the wall. Now can you imagine all those atrocities we had to witness sometimes? Some Orthodox men, when they walk through the streets, they've hidden their beards in their collars, in their coats, and walking terrified. Some escaped, and some I witnessed myself. They called over that man, and one of these officers came down from his jeep and with his bodyguard, and he called him over, "Come, Jude, come here," and taken out the scissors and cut the beard. But not only the beard, but he pointed with his scissors this way and that way, and the blood was pouring down with flesh. And that man collapsed, and they kicked him until the man did not move. And that occurred, unfortunately, very, very often. And it wasn't a normal life, as you can imagine, what you must have read about or what you heard from other people. Segregation of women, being taken away from their children. The scream, can you imagine? You heard from the neighbors. In the middle of the night, they used to come in, knocking on doors, throwing people out, taking the people out. And it was, but how much I like to portray is impossible to describe. And then we had to register in order to obtain a seal on our identity card to get into the ghetto. Our family did not get it. We were pleased in one way, because at least we're not so locked away. So we were told, leave our home, and we were allowed only about 30 kilos of our belongings to take with us, personal things, clothes, and walk on foot about 35 kilometers outside Krakow. Anyway, so our family did not get, and we went to Borek. We had previously a very nice home, so many rooms, spacious, beautiful. So they took us into this small room. It was one bed, and a corner, you could put on a little kettle there, and no bathroom, nothing, and a toilet in a corridor sharing with other families. And my mother was very optimistic. She says, let's do it. Please God, everything be okay. We have to do what they tell us to do. Can you imagine? We slept. My sisters, my mother, and myself. And 2, 3, 4 of us, we were sleeping in one bed. And then we had to march on foot to the city, to Krakow, to the center, to the factory. And I was very fortunate how to learn how to operate a sewing machine. was wonderful. We were repairing uniforms, and you know, they came back from the front. They were full of lice, full of insects. It was horrible. And every so often we had to go to the toilet and brush off from our bodies that insect. The food was rationed. We had still some bit of money and some jewelry, so the Polish people came to the gates and we exchanged for a loaf of bread, for a ring, for a watch. They made good business out of it. And back again to our quarters, to Borek. That went on for about a year. And then the people were in the ghetto. Then there were huge posters everywhere that all the Jews who are living outside the ghetto have to get into the ghetto. Now they have to be accommodated there. Why they called us back? And where were all the other people gone? They went to various other concentration camps, to gas chambers, to Majdanek, to Gross-Rosen, Mauthausen, everywhere. And so the day came when we entered this ghetto, half of the size of the room which we had previously, the same thing, one bed. It was terrible, dark, impossible to describe. Then we had to do the work again, and the segregations began. People were sent away, and the rumors they're going to create a concentration camp, it's going to be built on a Jewish cemetery. So in order to clear all the tombstones, they've taken every day, shall we say, about 300 men from the ghetto. And half of them returned back in the evening. Why? Because they've been tortured to that extent. They ended their lives there and there. They've been shot. They couldn't carry the stones fast enough or chop them quick enough. One can't possibly imagine. So every day were casualties. Loss of husbands, fathers, brothers. Every single day. There was not one day without casualties. In the meantime, again, segregations of men. It would be in alphabetical order. So my brother, who studied dentistry, had a friend, he studied chemistry. And they had 2 girlfriends, and they felt very close to each other. So the rabbi performed a ceremony, named them husband and wife. Not that they could live together, but they wanted to feel they belonged to each other. If by any chance they send them away, they wanted to search for each other. So Mansa was one of my brothers, Vilek, and one of my sisters. So the day came when the men assembled there, and a friend of my brother's been sent away. So he was very upset, came home. Following the day, the wife of his friend came over and asked my brother to come and help him to move a wardrobe. So my brother went over there, and he taken a table in order to stand on it to clear the things from the wardrobe. And a shot fired at him. As bad news travels very fast, reached us, and he's been taken to the hospital. My mother, my 2 sisters, and myself, we rushed to the hospital, but we weren't allowed to enter. We had to wait for permission. And we waited for a while. And suddenly, a body been carried out, covered in a black cloth, and it wasn't large enough to cover the whole body. and placed on a trolley in front of us. Can you imagine? We stand the three here, and I was like on my right side, and I looked at that body, and I thought, why they placing this body here? And I looked again, and I've recognized that they were the feet of my brother. You see, we were 9 children. 4 sisters and 5 brothers. And he was the youngest of the sisters, of the brothers, and I was the youngest of the sisters. And we had so much in common. I looked up to him. He was, wonderful, wonderful friend and a brother. And of course, I nudged my mother. I said, look, this is Vilek. My mother says, oh, no, he's upstairs, they're operating on him. Then my sister walked over and she looked at, and took quite a while, my mother, to realize this is her son. And of course, we weren't allowed to accompany the body to the cemetery. The proper burial wasn't allowed, and that was the end of him. Now, can you imagine our tears? We had to wipe him away and rush to our rooms. The pain which we endured that time is impossible to understand for anyone to comprehend. And then again to work and work. And then they told us women's going to be segregated. And then the women as alphabetical order, my sister-in-law, who stood in front of us, and myself, my mother, my other sisters behind. And while we were waiting for our turn, my sister-in-law taken out a few sweets and gives them to eat to my little nephew. And he turned round to her, Mommy, don't give me those sweets, you eat him. And don't worry, if the Germans want to shoot me, he will lay down and he will pretend that he is dead. Now, can you imagine a child of 3.5 years old to turn around to say that to his mother? And as we approached the Nazis, a panel of about 30 of them in front of us, and they told my sister and my nephew to go to the right, my mother and my sisters to the left. And there was so many hundreds of women in front of us, and we waited for our turn to leave. And I turned around, and I've seen my sister-in-law and so many women and children there. And I thought to myself, this is something wrong here. So I waved to her to come over, and my nephew to run towards me. And he did. You see, such an instinct, I felt I wanted to save him. Whether I could save him for a day or a week or months is another hand, but somehow I felt like it. And he did run, just about to hide him behind my back. 2 Nazis rushed down and they grabbed him and threw him to his mother. So he must go with his mother. And that was the very first transport to Auschwitz. And the rest you can imagine, straight into the gas chamber. So it was another loss of them. And life had to go on, we had to do the work. And so many people were dying, it's impossible to describe. One night we had a knock on our windows, and this man was standing there with a bandaged head, not with a bandage, with a shirt full of blood, and happened to be, my mother rushed. She opened the door, it was my brother, who served in the Polish army. You see, the Nazis took surrender. They segregated the Jewish soldiers from the Christian ones. They've taken him to the woods to be shot. And my brother managed to escape. While he was escaping, he was shot. but not bad enough. He managed to get into the ghetto. And next door was a doctor, and my mother took him in, and he seen to his wounds and bandaged, and it was, thank God, he survived. And to tell him about his wife and his child was a very difficult task. But when he heard that, he says, I'm not going to stop here. I'm going to fight the Germans. He's going to the French resistance and help them. And he managed to obtain some Christian papers. And he didn't look Jewish. And a few of his friends, they went down the sewers in the ghetto in order to get out. And the other side, the Germans waited. And they shot him there and there. It was not a loss of them. To leave the ghetto, and we walked on foot, and we entered this Plaszow. That was the very first concentration camp, which, by the way, if you've seen Schindler's List, is filmed in that camp. And every morning we had to stand to attention at 5 o'clock in the morning and wait for Commander Goeth to appear in that huge Appellplatz. And then we were told to go to work. But so many days, bad days, the Commander Goeth appeared. He used to come with 2 Alsatian dogs, Ukrainians, bodyguards, and sometimes galloped on a horse, and sometimes he walked with a whip in one hand and a gun in the other. And walked over to our side, to women's side, looked around, several lashes across our faces. Then he walked over to the men's side. He looks around. He says, you haven't shaved today, shot him down. You look too stupid, shot him down. You shaved today, for no reason. In a morning like that, he could shot about 50 men. And then we were told to go to work. And that occurred very, very often. So many people were shot. We walked on foot, bodyguards, Alsatian dogs. And at night the same thing. And then the factories were built in a camp, so we did not have any reason to get out anymore, just everything was concentrated in the camp itself, with the exception of one group where my sister Miriam was working and her husband was architect. And in the evening she used to bring up some soup for us, and we shared with the others, which they did not have the taste of it for a long time, like she cooked them there. And some bread she brought us. And one evening she comes over, she says, you know, she's so upset that I'm so locked away, and she hopes that she's got a job for me. I'll be able to come out with her and help more people to come back with some more food to share with the others. And she says, I'll come back tomorrow and I'll let you know. And tomorrow come, and I used to come about 7 o'clock in the evening, she used to come. And it happened to be on the 14th of September. It was getting already dark, dusk. And I walked over to the window, waited for her, and suddenly I heard shots. And said, your power just throw me away from the window. And I shook my head, and I said to myself, what is it? And then I walked towards the window. I heard more shots and more, and then silence. And I thought myself, oh, must have been a segregation. A transport must have come, and they segregated the people, those who were fit to work, left them alive, those not, they've been shot there and there. So I told my mother, I said, you know, it must be a transport. And then still we were waiting. Then a group of girls came into the camp, to the factory, and they've been shushing in the corner. And I walked over, they stopped talking. Another group of girls came in, and they talked amongst themselves. Then I approached them and I said, could you please tell me what's happened outside, those shots? Oh, they said, nothing, a transport, they said. And one of them turned around, she says, she's got to know the truth. Yes, there were 55 men and one girl. They had to dig their own grave, and they undressed, they'd been shot. And the master was my sister. To tell that news to my mother was a very difficult task. The tears we shed that time, we could have filled buckets full of. And then we had to go to work. We had to carry wood for the bodies to be burnt, because the Germans didn't want to leave any trace. So can you imagine, for a mother to know this is her child there, that she's carrying wood for the body to be burned. And as for myself, she always used to sleep on that side of my arm. And from that night onwards until today, I feel something like something torn away from me. Such a chill always is. So that was a loss of her. My sister Helen was working in Schindler's factory on a night shift. Early hours of the morning she was walking towards her living quarters. She's been kidnapped, taken to the hospital for experiments. They injected her with petrol and they drew out her blood. When I tried to see her, I went aloud. When I asked the nurses there and the sister of the hospital, I said, could you tell me, how is Helen, can I see her? You can't see her, but she's all right. That's tone she used. And she wasn't all right, and that was the end of her. So I was just left with my mother, and I must tell you, whatever food I could obtain, I always gave it to her. Because I didn't want her to starve.
What happened to your mum in the end?
And sometimes I was very hungry. But I saw that she's not starving was sufficient for me. And we did not stay there long. I mean, in the camp. Then we went. We had to move on, leave Poland, and leave Krakow rather, Plaszów. We walked on foot, and so many thousands of people died on the side into the gutter. So many people been shot, so many people been just collapsed. And we eventually entered Auschwitz. Auschwitz, we were segregated by Dr. Mengele, and one group of women went one side and we were told to a shower room. And we walked toward the shower room, we undressed, we left our clothes behind. We were told, and there went no towels or soap. We entered this place, bitter cold in the winter, can you imagine? Shivering, stone floors, openings in the ceiling. And so many of us women there. And we waited and waited, and all of a sudden, a door opened, and walked in a woman which I knew her. She was working as a clerk in a previous camp. And I tried to push myself to some of the women for her, to speak to her. And she noticed me. And she turned around, she says, "Ah, you are here." And she rushed out. She stretched her arms like that. And she rushed out. And after a little while, water came. And we showered ourselves, ice cold water, by the way. and we drank and we were so thirsty. And then the water stopped. Then the doors opened and we walked out of there, and the women who worked there shouted, "You are alive, how wonderful to see you. We thought we never see you again." And they shouted, they screamed, embraced us. I said, "What are you talking about?" They said, "Don't you know where you've been?" I said, "No, where?" "You were in a guest chamber." And when I heard that, I completely, utterly lost my voice. And after a few minutes, I just started saying a few words, and then I realized there must have been power over powers, that God must have saved my life and so many others who were with me. Of course, our clothes were destroyed, taken somewhere, and each of those women brought us a blanket, and we walked on foot. Okay. My story goes on, and we sent to Belsen, and in Belsen there was a Vernichtungslager, the German called, Finnish camp. I was working as a nurse, trying saving people, the typhus epidemic, the dysentery, and all diseases were very rife. And people were dying like flies. One can't possibly imagine, in the hundreds. Then one day I sterilized the instruments, and happened to be on a Sunday, and I've seen some tanks coming in, then the gates opened and loudspeakers and jeeps, a voice came through, "We British, we came to liberate you. The Nazis have got nothing more to say to you. Be happy." And tears of joy poured down my cheeks. And then some officers came to the hospital, and I gave them some water to wash their hands. But they were still armed. They were still accompanied by the Nazis. They were still armed, which I could not understand why have not yet been disarmed. But that wasn't for very long. They were told by the British intelligence corps to lay down their arms, and then they arrested all the guards, the Nazi women, and all whoever they were of German descent. And the same afternoon, two British officers came to the hospital searching for some Nazis, and I was called by one of the nurses, because she didn't speak another languages, and as I came out, and they asked me why I looked so clean. I had a white overall, so I explained it to them that there's no soap, no water, and people dying like flies. And they asked me would I speak English, but I couldn't. We conversed in German. I only knew 2 words: sky is blue and the sun is shining. And then one of the officers, happened to be Jewish, came in every day to listen to interrogate me, what happened and this and that. I shall tell my story. And then I was invited to the officers' mess for dinner, because I've been working very hard, and I had this invitation by the captain, Stephen. And as I approached the door, Norman opens the door, and I stepped back. So he asked me, "Why are you stepping back?" I said, "Look, you must be expecting some special visitors." There were beautifully decorated tables with white tablecloths and flowers. So he said, turned around, he says, "You are the special visitor. This is our engagement party." So I said, "Look, you don't know me and I don't know you." But as we approached inside, I was offered a glass of wine by the captain, congratulating me. And all his colleagues came around congratulating me. And I thought myself, they must be crazy because I don't know this man. But you see, when he first saw me in the hospital, he made up his mind that this is the girl he's going to marry. Never mind me what I thought. So I didn't want to spoil the evening, so I thought I'd let him get away with it. He's taken us back to our barrack, and off they went. Following day, he comes over again with his secretary, and we talked again, and he wanted to give me a kiss. I pushed him away. He says, "You are my fiancé." He's taken a ring off, and he types up the official paper that I'm engaged to a British sergeant. I have to wait for his return to get married. Why did he do that? Because his unit had to move on further into deep Germany to search in for high officials for the Nazis, to assure himself that I'd be there for him. So he left me that ring with this official paper. And I completely ignored, because the influx of people from all over Europe who were still alive, they came searching for their loved ones. About the end of September, suddenly Norman appeared, and he says he's got only 2 hours leave. He came specially to establish our marriage, and please don't say no. And with a lot of persuasion, I agreed, and then we got married October. Reverend Hardman, who was a chaplain in the British Army, he married us, and a friend of Norman's brought in a British parachute and took me to a dressmaker. My dress was made out of British parachute. I presented to the Imperial War Museum there, and it's there on show. And as a British subject, I wasn't allowed to stay in Germany. Norman was given compassion leave to take me to England. My very first step was Hendon, where my in-laws lived, and their life, I was the happiest woman in the world. And thank God that I'm alive, able to tell my story and to broaden the people's horizon. And I only wish the generation of today, younger, and generations to come, should never experience what I have experienced. Thank you.